Shivinder, you were saying something.
I was just saying, is he going to recommend that? Is Mr. Singh going to recommend some ministries being shut down?
No, but again, the question is why not at the regional levels? Why is this obsession with the Prime Minister and the central ministries where even the Prime Minister now agrees that I can only work if the states perform and develop, right?
So I think, Pranjal, I think a lot of the answers do lie in states and city magistrates and so on and so forth. But you also have to have an environment where that's welcome and that interaction actually has positive results. Let me ask you two quick questions. How much is the cost of a plumber in Delhi or Bombay coming home to fix your plumbing issue?
If you get one.
Well, it's quite expensive depending on the task.
Just give me a range.
400 or 500 rupees at least.
And how much education does a plumber need to be a plumber?
I'm not so sure whether he needs education.
So if you have a city that's passed a law that to get a consultation for a 15-year educated doctor to get a dengue consult for 60 rupees with a test and thrown in, what message are you giving the education sector? What education giving the youth to say, it's going to cost me 500 bucks to get a plumber, but I can only get 60 bucks as a senior doctor because dengue is a problem. So I think we have to solve the problem at the root level rather than solving it through kind of diktats that we do. You can't have anything working because your government system is broken. Now to put that impact on the private sector to solve your problem because you can't do that and solve the wrong problem. I mean, dengue is happening because of mosquitoes, not because doctors are putting injections on patients. So let's solve the mosquitoes, let's solve the hygiene issue.
Ban the mosquito.
Yeah. Put a law, put them into China or something. And rather than solving, killing the doctor for, why would he work? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So I think we have to have a collaborative environment where people are looking at solving the problem here. We don't look for that.
See, your question is, effectively what you're saying is that local government representatives and political leadership is not up to the task. Is that what you're saying?
No, I think what...
Are you saying that chief ministers...
No, I think what Mohandas Pai said about the fact that the focus on getting votes and the sectoral requirement is at a different place than where the right thing to do is. So if Bangalore needs money to develop infrastructure and that's not going to give them votes, they're not going to do it. If the votes are coming from Karnataka rural and the money is coming from Bangalore and money is required in Bangalore, there's a bit of a... So I think structural shifts are there. So if there's no alignment towards promoting industry or sectors or jobs, it's not going to get solved just because you're going and talking to the local leadership. And the same can be applied to the national level, but I think there's a lot of stuff to be done on each level.
So I think there's a very good question I've got, which I think refers to what you said and what Subir says. I don't have the name of the person who wrote the question, but the question is that in Pakistan, most of the business matters are now being handled by independent regulators. And I think here independent should be underlined and not by ministries. The fact of independent regulation, which will take away the powers of arbitrary decision making from people who are not really responsible enough, that still hasn't happened. So Subir and Mohan, when can we get independent regulators?
Look,
truly independent
I
regulators.
met the power regulator and to ask him the question, is your duty of care to the consumer or to the government which runs the power companies? He said, I have to make sure the power companies are still alive, so my duty of care is largely towards them. They're set up for the consumer. Now you put a retired bureaucrat there, his loyalty is elsewhere, you don't get people from the market, then in case Mr. Singh said, it's a regulatory capture. That independent word is important. Independent from whom? Independent from the consumer? Or independent from the government? So we have a challenge about making them work. It's not the institutional framework. It's making those institutions work, giving them freedom. It's not the banking financial system framework. Allowing the bank to perform. The chairperson of State Bank of India, the largest bank with a 20 lakh crore balance sheet, is disempowered. Disempowered. What do? The largest bank in the country. So we need to make them work.
I think it's an evolutionary process very clearly. It can, in certain circumstances, happen quicker.
I hope that's not going to be a Darwinian pace.
No, that's the point. So what do you do to facilitate it? What do you do to speed it up? I think ultimately all of our economic processes, it's not so much that we're not moving in the right direction in most cases. It is a question of what stops them from moving faster. Every post-reform, post-1991, it's always been a matter of pace, not of direction. And slow pace is costly. Slow pace is hurting us. There's a huge opportunity cost. But I think in terms of regulatory space, as we look at the historical evolution of regulators, the longer they've been in place, for the most part, and of course I'm generalizing, there are obvious exceptions, the more independent they've been. There's a whole process of asserting independence, of making the right decisions, of gaining credibility. And once you gain credibility within the larger stakeholder constituency, the consumer or the industry, I think it becomes that much more difficult for the government to impose discretionary will on it. And that's the way it goes. But it's not something that can happen overnight. It needs to be nurtured. And here appointments, I think, are a key factor. And it needs to be supported by very strong law, which makes sure, which explicitly protects the independence of the regulator. I think we have varying degrees of success on most of these fronts.
Thank you.
I just want to make two comments. Independent regulators, but who will regulate the regulators? Because the oldest regulator, Subir, is the Reserve Bank of India in the Act of 1934. In all these independent regulatory institutions, there is a proviso that the government can issue a directive in public interest. Fortunately, not used. But what happens when you create independent regulators is Parliament has enacted laws to do away with functions which are performed by the executive to vest with the regulator. But the regulators are accountable to whom? To themselves. Because I think that interface between legislature and the regulator is zilch. So we need to think of modalities in which, whereas you prevent a regulatory capture, you are able to have some interface mechanisms which exist in other parts of the world. For instance, the federal chief has an interaction with the Senate committee, with the congressional committee. In many of these countries, there are interface between legislators and regulators which need to be done. Second, Mohan, to your question. Unfortunately, if you have regulatory acts in which the terms and conditions of appointment, manner of appointment are such, and the pay and allowances are such of these regulators, you will unfortunately get only retired bureaucrats like me to apply for jobs like this. You will not get domain experts. So I think you need, if you want really for the regulatory culture to flourish, need to alter the structure of their appointments, the process of their appointments, and the terms and conditions of the appointment, which will enable you to garner the advantage of independent regulatory institutions.
Thank you. I want to end the session in the next 5 minutes, but what I would request is perhaps one representative both from the Pakistan delegation and the China delegation to give us a sense of how they look at India from their perspective. Amin Bhai, perhaps I could request you to share your thoughts and question if you have for the panel. Can we have a mic for Amin Bhai, please?
I don't mind asking the question, but I can ask one of my colleagues who might be more competent on this particular topic. Asfar, where are you guys sitting? You guys, they're gone? Okay. I think we in Pakistan, our financial sector reforms, if you see in the 90s, were quoted by the World Bank. And a lot of shocks in other sectors happened, and we created the buffers that really helped us tremendously. And there was a very proactive approach by the government at that time to actually let go of powers. We talk about these independent regulators. I think they worked fantastically for us in that sector. So I think sometimes you have to kind of, lose battles to win wars. And for us, I think it kind of worked out very well. I understand intrinsically it's not easy for politicians and bureaucrats to just let go of power. But I think sometimes you need to do that. And I'm sure, like you mentioned, that independent regulation, there can be some mechanisms, certain frameworks, rules and regulations under which they can operate. And so in Pakistan's experience, it's not been perfect, but it has actually worked out quite well. We see India from Pakistan like a sleeping giant, which is waking up. And so there are a lot of things in Pakistan we actually look forward to learning from India. And I think it'll be a good idea for you guys to as well see Pakistan. We have certain success stories and they've worked out very well. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good thought. Would any of the panelists want to respond to that? Mohan, would you like to?
We have to learn from each other, that's very sure, because every country has done some things very well and we
But
need to learn.
I'll keep the mic. I mean, one question I have which is related to this is that, you know, India's growth, we're talking about the India growth story, and perhaps Subir can weigh in on this as well, cannot happen without the regional perspective. So South Asia has to grow. So how do you see the linkages in South Asia for India and the neighboring countries, everybody to grow together the way, you know, East Africa is moving together. Europe is not a great example right now, but there are several regions which are coming together in an economically integrated way. And do you see that as an important factor of growth?
Absolutely. I think I've been coming to India since past 15 years, specifically on these initiatives. I just see just incredible, so much misperception, so many, this hot air of just these mountains created, which actually do not exist. And I said, you know, earlier on that Mark Twain said that travel is fatal to prejudice, biasnesses, etc. So if we can just open up, we don't need any rocket science solutions. All we just need is, like I mentioned yesterday, civil society to start engaging with each other. That's all. And that has been the key, which I feel from India's particularly, not cricket players not coming from Pakistan, not playing hockey, etc. Or sometimes the art's not happening. While you know, we have dramas finally coming through, while in Pakistan we have a very multidimensional approach, view of India, and a lot of us admire Indian stars, Indian corporate CEOs, etc. I just feel if we can just open the civil society, trust me, they will create the spaces for the politicians to do those not difficult but easy tasks, which they have failed last 60 years. It can be done, and I just feel it's been tragic that we have not done it. So if the government simply allow the businesses to operate, the arts, the culture, the sportsmen to do it, trust me, they will do it naturally and with love and with open hearts.
Mr. Singh, would you like to respond to this, especially the integration for the region?
Well, I think that I fully support this stream, that greater integration and interaction at multiple levels, particularly in terms of opening up of trade and commerce, will be enormously beneficial. Having been to Pakistan several times on delegations, both official and not so official, I think that's one thing which we have all concluded, that fostering greater interaction at multiple levels is something to which both countries will gain, and certainly it would have multiplier effects for the regional development as a whole.
Thank you. Anybody from the Chinese delegation would like to share a thought? I see some of our guests here on the table. Would anybody like to have a comment or a question on how they see India's growth? And no question. I think they're fairly satisfied. Thank you so much. But maybe I think I should close the session now. The thought
Pranjal,
which is coming through. Yeah, sure.
I want to make one statement.
Sure, please.
China has ensured the whole of Southeast Asia and Japan supply to China, and all of them have a trade surplus with China, if my figures are right, and China has got a deficit with them. So they all have a great stake in China. China opened up for the world to have a stake. $1 trillion of investment has come in. And when the world has a stake, when all the countries in the neighborhood have a stake in you, you buy from them and you create business from them, relationship goes up. Economy, the whole area develops because you are the growth engine. Now, India as a country of 1.25 billion people has a responsibility to its neighbors to allow them to have a stake in this economy and to supply so that India can use it for its own consumption and to export and to work together. I mean, I totally agree with him that the China model of doing that is very good. There are some issues, but we can resolve these issues. So we have to open up much more for more investment to come, more, let's say, stakes to come in and more trade to come in. That's the key.
Subir, quick point on this. Regional integration and interaction, how critical is that for India's own growth?
I think it's critical for the region, not just for India. We have 1.6, 1.7 billion people roughly at similar levels of per capita income, so that's a homogeneous market in terms of many goods. The demographics of all of these countries are sort of similar, so they have more or less the same time horizons and windows of opportunity. A growth neighborhood is a growth neighborhood. You can't have one country doing well while everybody else languishes. And that's the Asian story. It is a growth neighbor story. Everybody benefiting from everybody else's performance. If we are passing up that opportunity, I think we're really being very, very short-sighted
the next big challenge for the world is an Asian common market. Imagine an Asian common market not linked by a formal mechanism like the EU. It's just an Asian common market where barriers to trade have come down. Each one trades. It's the largest economic bloc in the world, has the largest population in the world, largest quantum of investment in the world. So we break barriers with our neighbors, break barriers with other countries in the region. This is the hot story for this whole century. I think the focus of diplomacy and India has to be on creating a great Asian common market by reducing barriers. Don't have a formal agreement, currency union is not going to work. But just reduce barriers, promote trade, like you said, promote visits, and you see in 10 years a very different thing.
I really think you should stand for elections, Mohan. You have some of the best ideas. Thank you very much, and thanks very much for joining this session. And please join me in thanking the panelists for sharing their ideas.
May I now invite Mr. H.M. Nerurkar, President AIMA, to please join us on stage to present mementos to our distinguished speakers of the session. Our sincere thanks to Mr. N.K. Singh, former Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha and Senior Member of BJP. Our sincerest thanks to Mr. T.V. Mohandas, Chairman, Manipal Global Education Services. Our thanks to Mr. Shivinder Mohan Singh, Executive Vice Chairman, Fortis Healthcare Limited. Our sincere thanks to Mr. Subir Gokarn, Director of Research, Brookings Institution India Centre. And our sincerest thanks to the moderator of the session, Mr. Pranjal Sharma, the host, the appointment, Z Network. Thank you, Mr. Nerurkar. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of plenary session 8. But please do remain seated as we are immediately